he can find at the marketplace. And he goes and he buys him some tongue. And he says, okay, that's interesting. He wanted to kind of see what his servant would bring him. So he said to him, okay, now I want you to go back to the marketplace and find me the worst meat you could find. And he comes back with, again, cow's tongue. So Rabbi Gamliel says, I don't understand. If it's the best meat, how could it be the worst meat? So his reply was, his reply is that he said, well, the tongue has the ability to give life or to take life. It's the most powerful tool that people have. It's an extremely powerful tool. And if we're not careful of it, if we're careful, you could lift somebody up, you can make somebody feel good, you can make somebody feel great. But if you're not careful, it can do the opposite. You could bring people down, you can crush people, you can destroy people's lives. I told Noach that I recently read two books in psychology about human trauma and how that's suffering, and especially it could be in adults PTSD, but particularly in childhood, how sometimes our words that we say could be, hey Joe, could be so powerful and have such strong impacts on people that for many generations later. I read in a book recently that they said if you say the right thing to certain children at the right time, it could have impacts for years to come. And if you have the wrong thing at the wrong time, sometimes the opposite. But for most kids, it's usually something more extreme, or there's abuse involved or neglect involved. But it's just telling you the power of the tongue. There's a famous mashal brought down by Shlomo HaMelech when he talks about the power of the tongue. Um, and the story was that there was a king, the martial analogy, I think it's brought down by Shlomo Melech. Analogy is that there was a king that had a son that was tremendously unwell, terribly unwell, and he needed a cure for his son. He brought all these people together. No one was able to come and find a cure. One day, a physician comes and says, I could tell you this, Stephanie, this is the cure. The cure that your son needs is only one thing that can cure your son. I've seen this, Stephanie, there's one cure, and that's to attain lion's milk. How do you get lion's milk? Oh, that's a whole skill. You have to be able to calm the lion down and give him a sheep to calm him while he's calmly eating the sheep. Then maybe the lion will. Anyway, the man goes and he does the thing. He takes the sheep and he feeds it to the lion, and he does this for a few days. Eventually, the lion is not interested in him, and he's able to play with the lion while the lion's eating the sheep, and he gets the milk out of the lioness. Anyway, they travel back to the man travels back to the king, and on his road back to the king, he he falls asleep and he has a dream, and in the dream there's a fight going on between the different parts of his body, and some feet say, "Hey, I should get all the reward and the gratitude, all the credit, because I'm the one that's responsible. If not for me, you wouldn't have been able to go get the milk." The the arms say, "No, I'm the one that actually got the milk." The eyes say, "No, it's me. I'm the one that saw where to go and actually saw it." Each one says their part. And the Tanya says, "No, listen, I was the one that said the idea." They said, "Oh, come on, you did nothing. You did nothing. Anyone could do that." Okay. So the son Tan says, "Okay, we'll see what happens." So um, he goes back to the king and he says to the king, "Here, king, I got you some chalav kalba." And the king says, "What? You said it was lioness?" "Oh, no, I got you dog's milk. A kalba could also in certain ways could also be a female lion, something like that. I'm trying to think if I'm saying this wrong, but anyway, he said it in a way that it was a tongue twister, and it was totally misunderstood, and the king was going to put him to death because of what this person said. Anyway, he's sitting and rotting in prison, and he has another dream, and all the limbs of the body in the dream are shouting at the tongue, "What did you say? Why did you say nonsense?" He says, "Well, I told you, I warned you." And he said it. He went back and explained that Kalba is usually actually a lioness, and therefore he actually intended to say a lioness. And then they said, "Okay, the tongue, you get the reward." Now, this analogy was initially brought to tell us the proof of how powerful. You just say one thing wrong at the wrong time, it could have such a powerful impact, and the impact could be everlasting. But the truth is that there's so much more you could learn from that story, which is that how everything is important, and you need every single part of the body to do its part, and everyone has to work together. That's true as well. But without a doubt, if we're not careful what we say, it's going to have tremendous impact. So Shlomo Melech in Kohelet, he said, Chaim v'moves b'yad halashon. Life and death is in the hands of the tongue. Now, for us, for many people, we hear the topic gossip. When I think of the topic gossip or evil talk, to me, it's not an interesting topic. I'll be honest. So why am I teaching it? Okay, because we came across it. It was the discussion of the last two portions of our Torah. It was brought up two weeks ago, Tazria Torah, all about the man that got tzaraat. And we're told that the person got tzaraat was because they had spoken evilly against somebody else. It was a spiritual sickness that affected his body physically. It made him impure and have to distance himself from people because he had caused affliction and separation between other people. He had spoke lashon hara, disparaging against other people. And in last week's portion, the second portion, the first portion, Kedoshim, we saw this word it was the actual commandment. And this is directly connected to what we've spoken about in previous Shiurim. You'll see the same place. Look at this. Remember we spoke about not hating your brother, about rebuking, about making sure you don't embarrass them, not taking revenge. Remember all that stuff? Look at the verse before that. Do not go gossip monger amongst your brothers. The Torah is telling us straight up not to be a gossiper. And the basic, he says, Lo tamod al dam, don't stand on your brother's blood. And there's obviously a direct connection. There's always a connection between each verse when they fall in order. The order of the verses always are connected, especially if it's the same verse. So this is a really powerful statement, once again, telling us that when a person talks evilly against his fellow Jew, fellow person, he causes bloodshed. Without a doubt, the number one cause for bloodshed is lashon hara, where people talk evil about others. Now, I'm going to qualify what lashon hara is and what is. It's called ruchilut. The word is ruchilut, means gossip. There's different categories of this. But what does the Torah want? What does God want? God wants us to live in peace and harmony, and knows that the number one concept, number one idea that prevents us from living in peace and harmony is when we talk negatively against each other. There is nothing worse and more damaging to our peace and our harmony and our unity than talking badly against each other. So in a theory, if there was one mitzvah that was so important, which mitzvah would it be? If we were talking about ultimate is to have peace and unity and love, this one would be almost the primary one. But the truth is it is, because if you look 2 psukim down, as you finish this whole section, really, this is the end of a section, and these mitzvahs are about basic menschlichkeit, basic humanity and kindness, and all these mitzvahs. This chapter it talks. I just want to just give you a little understand, just so you see a little bit of in a bigger picture. From here it says, God says to Moses, tell the Jewish people you should be holy. This is the beginning of the second part of Achrei Kedoshim, the second part in this pasuk. First, it tells us that we have to have respect for our parents and keep the Shabbat, telling us not to serve idols, then not to bring, not to have sacrifice in the wrong place, talking about sacrifices when you have to eat them, and telling us then it goes on to common sense laws about caring for people. Number one, leaving food for the poor. Over Kutzrachem, when you cut the field, make sure you cut the field. Make sure that you leave some grapes and food. Okay, so it's first of all starts by telling us take care of the needy. Then it goes and make sure you never steal, you don't talk falsehood, and you don't lie. So it's not, by the way, Lashon Hara is not necessarily just lying, because that was a separate law, Lo Teshakru. The next thing it tells us not to swear, another extremely important law. All these laws are important, but I'm just saying the weight are, every law is important, but sometimes it shouts out to you, and definitely today's law shouts out. Lo Shavur Shmira Shakir. Don't falsely if you swear falsely, profane. And we'll talk about each of these individually as we get to them. The next one is not to oppress, not to rob, not to murder, and then not to put a stumbling block in front of God. Fear God, don't do injustice, and then it comes to talking evilly about your fellow. So this is talking about, could be that we're talking about even talking good about your fellow, but it has a damaging effect on it. Or even the truth, when it's not required, that's also terrible. It tells us further not to hate your brother, to rebuke your brother at the right time, and not to take revenge. And then it concludes with these famous lines of Rabbi Akiva, which is very apparent, especially when we come to Lag BaOmer this week, I sent out the text message, by the way, so late today about what the topic is, because I was debating, should I do the Lashon Hara topic or should I do something on Lag BaOmer? And then I decided, you know what, it's all connected. So you'll understand what I mean by that in a moment. V'yahavta l'reacha kamocha. What is Rabbi Akiva's most famous statement, possibly one of the most famous statements in all of rabbinic law, is love your fellow as yourself, right? And this is the conclusion of this whole section, and particularly the last verses. Rabbi Akiva is telling us, if you want to love your fellow, definitely we cannot be gossip mongers. And our focus today is gossip mongering. But we know that we're going to be celebrating Lag BaOmer, and Lag BaOmer is the day that the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying. Rabbi Akiva had 24,000 students, and they all died between, according to different opinions, exactly how it worked, but they stopped dying on Lag BaOmer. And that's one of the reasons why we celebrate Lag BaOmer. But what was Rabbi Akiva? He said, "V'haptarecha kamocha." What was we told? What was the punishment? What was the thing? What was the evil doing? What was the sin, so to speak, of his students? Was la nahagu kavod zelazeh. They weren't respectful of each other, which means that they never had enough respect to understand and listen to each other. Not necessarily that they were talking evil; they never did evil. But it was all about respect and making sure that you're able to respect the other person's opinion. Okay. Now we've seen that in context. I want to give you some halachic classifications for this. Okay. What's the halachic classifications about Lashon Hara? So there's generally halacha divides the concept of Lashon Hara into three categories. The first thing is called ruchilut, which comes from the word, as we saw in the pasuk, rachil, a gossip monger. Okay. Now, what does that mean? It's anything that you say or is said that could have any type of negative that is about other people. and has the ability to have a negative impact on them. Talking about other people, gossiping, that's rachilut. Now that's the most basic concept. Now, in the term that we most commonly use, there's the idea of lashon hara, evil language. And lashon hara is something that in and of itself is divided into two categories. Sometimes you can be saying something negative about somebody, even if it's true, and the person will never find out. It's still lashon hara. So sitting by your Shabbos table or your dinner table or calling up your friend and saying something negative about that person, even if it's true, and even if the person will never find out about it, it is still considered lashon hara. Now, the next category of lashon hara is anything said intended to harm someone else, but it could be a positive thing. So let's say you say to somebody, sometimes we say these things, and we're all human. This is, by the way, I'm going to get into what the Talmud says, but I should really say it at the start. The Talmud says there's 3 sins that most people fail in, and one of those is lashon hara. So I'm not standing here preaching as though I am innocent of the sin, so to speak, as though I never talk about people. I wish I didn't. And we're learning it not because I'm trying to work on this, but at least if we don't talk about it, then we won't know what we have to work on. So once again, I'm not talking to you from a point of where I've perfected this particular area. Although my wife could tell you that since the day we got married, she knows that I don't like talking about people that much, especially if it's something that's not nice. But as I said, we're all guilty of this to some degree. But sometimes it's in a way where we say something nice about somebody, but we have a negative connotation. Like, let's say we'll say, "Oh, did you see that beautiful car that person's driving?" And you're giving the person a compliment, but you're also saying where the heck did the person get the money from? Or, in other words, you're putting your head in something, or you say, "Oh, did you see that girl in my class? Did you see how well he did in the test?" What you're saying, she's the dummy that did so well in the test. So you're saying it, and that's more about the intention of the person. So you're saying something positive. It's always good to talk positively about people. If your intention is ready for the positive, then it's good. And it's okay. It's not. I don't understand it to mean that we should never be talking about people. I don't think that that's the meaning. I think that the point is that we should never talk about people, either definitely not if it's directly negative about people, and even if it's positive, is our intention for something positive.
Rabbi, can I ask a question at this point, and something Yochanan will be able to relate to? Because in normal speech, it's very easy to make a statement which you never know what effect it's going to have on other people with the best of intentions. So the phrase I wanted to introduce in this discussion, which Yochanan can relate to, is the need to know basis, which is all part of information security, privacy, etc. So the need to know principle is you don't say anything unless someone has an established need to know.
But that's in a professional capacity you're talking about.
Doesn't have to be in a professional capacity. It can be in daily life.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I know I can see where you're coming from, Joe. I've come across that with what you're saying. Yeah. I need to know it because there's, yeah.
So hold on a second. Let me understand that sometimes let's say I'm a doctor or a psychologist or something else. Are you talking about, or a nurse or whatever, or something that's involved with medical health, and it's about, you only talk about things that you need to know?
Well, the origin of the policy can be in a workplace, but the applicability is way beyond the workplace in daily interaction. Because once someone leaves the workplace, they may still, well, I'll give you an example. For my own volunteering, I mean, I deal with clients right through the week. It happens to be in the health sector, and there'll be discussions there. But those discussions happen in confidence. And outside of that environment, I will not discuss anything. I won't even acknowledge that someone is a client or attends the facility, because mostly people don't need to know that.
Right. Well, that's an interesting, very interesting example that you're going to give, because that's one of the halachic classifications that I was going to say, which is that how do you know what you can say about people that is not wrong? And I saw somewhere that it says if people would be themselves happy to talk about it, even though generally if the person would talk about it in public, then for sure you can talk about it. Unless it's something negative, just because some people are happy to hold their shoulder. If they themselves are talking about it, then it's okay. In other words, even so, it has to be for a positive intention. So, if you're talking about, let's say, you want to say somebody's gay. Now, if somebody doesn't want people to talk about the fact that they're gay, then we're definitely not allowed to talk about it, right? That's without a question. What happens if they say that you can? Let's say they're publicizing it, and they're so to speak come out of the closet about it. Are you allowed to talk about it then? So then the question is, are you saying it in a positive way or in a negative way? Are you saying, well, this person had the bravery to come out, or are you saying it's that the person, are you saying it in a derogatory way? And all those would apply. But once again, if a person themselves, for anything that they haven't come out, whether you consider that to be positive or negative, obviously the example that I gave is a little bit of a controversial one, but something that anybody would want to keep secret possibly, that definitely we don't have the ability to say. And that's a separate concept as well. There's an additional
Rabbi,
but the main concept over there is when you're talking about something, it's about what other people would be willing to say about themselves in a public or relatively public forum that you could talk about publicly.
I wasn't reflecting on the controversy, more why that topic had to be discussed at all regarding that person. They made an announcement about their, preference, but why should other people even remark on that at all? Why should it even be a topic of conversation?
Okay, well, I don't know. Why does anything come? If it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be. And then brings me to another halachic classification, which is this. What happens if it is required? What happens if, for example, you want to hire somebody for business and you want to call up one of their buddies or their rabbi or whatever, and you want to find, is this good person honest? Is he hardworking, etc., etc., right? Or I'll take it even further, and this is the big question within the religious world. We know that within the religious world, there's the shidduch process. And the way the shidduch process works is you don't just go out and date people, you do research before you date them. You want to find out what type of person that person is, what's their interest, what's their vision, what's their goals, what's their values, what where they're holding religiously. Because when we date people for marriage, not for fun, right? And you don't want to put the wrong people together. You don't want to waste their time, etc., etc. You don't want to hurt people, and you want to try to avoid as many uncomfortable situations as possible. So what happens if you get a phone call about something that you have a particularly unpleasant opinion about them, shall we say? Are you allowed to disclose that information? Right? What was that? What's the line you used? Need to know.
The need to know basis.
Right. So that's where halacha also says once again that on a need to know basis you can do it. Okay. So on a need to know basis, so if somebody calls you and says, I need to know for a shidduch, tell me about this person, generally you would have an obligation to say the truth. You don't have to say the truth in the most brutal and unflattering manner. You say it in a manner which is person gets the idea, but it's not your job to overly indulge in the idea and go into all the details of it. So halacha says that in those things you're obligated to say the truth. And comes down to the concept of another example is midvar sheker tirchach, you're not allowed to lie, right? when you're not allowed to lie, if somebody says to you, I want you to tell me about so and so, because I just want to find out about them, and they're just trying to pick up gossip on them for whatever reason. If you don't have a good reason to understand why they honestly and seriously need to know, then you would either say, listen, I don't know, you'd find an excuse, and you could lie to a certain degree. By the way, that's where we allow some level of lying rather than saying the truth and saying something negative about somebody. You're only allowed to say the negative about something if it's to help you. If you think somebody's actually a danger to other people, or you think that it's going to bring loss to other people, they're going to hire the wrong person, or the person honestly wants to know if that person's good, or for a shit out or those type of reasons. These are important ideas that have to come, and hopefully some of those things will come from the person themselves.
Um,
I-
does halakha have the equivalent of defamation? So if someone has been defamed, then they can take compensation action?
100% the concept of, and that's exactly what I was going to do. The next point. Joe, every time I'm about to say something, you say the point before me. Hold your horses, mate. No, I'm just kidding. You're doing great. It makes it more interesting when it comes from a question. So do we have defamation in halacha? That's the third category of lashon hara, is something called a defamation. Motzi shem ra. It's from the Torah. When somebody goes and makes up a story about somebody else, which is not a true story. That's Motzi shem ra. Now, the famous example that's given in the Torah of this is of somebody who's um, who gives his son to marry somebody, and he comes back with a story saying, my son married this woman on the condition that she was a virgin and she wasn't, or she was a virgin, but then during their betrothal time she lost her virginity. In old days, this is not done today, in old days there is still today 2 stages of marriage, but we do them in one shot, both done under the chuppah and immediately after the chuppah. In old days, they were done approximately a year apart. People got married younger. They would get betrothed to somebody, was called kiddushin, and then there would happen sometimes a month later, 6 months later, but on average a year later, they would do what was known as nisuyin, the marriage. Now, a person that's been betrothed, even before they get married, they're fully committed to that relationship, and they're not allowed to have a relationship with somebody else. So if a man comes and says, my son married this woman, but when he was betrothed, she was a virgin and now she's not. Now, there's different ways. How did you prove it, etc., etc.? Do you know? But she claimed to be a virgin and now she's not. So therefore, we're assuming that she lost her virginity. Maybe she cheated, whatever. Now, there's a whole story, but that's called the story of Motzi Shemra. That man, if he's making up a story, or it's not the man, it's the man himself, not the father, the man himself, the groom himself that makes up the story, then he has to pay compensation for disparaging the name of this person and making up a story for whatever reason, trying to get himself out of paying or whatever else that he could have been doing, because we know that to divorce in Judaism costs. So maybe he's trying to save himself, etc. Okay. That's the concepts. That's how it's defined in halacha. Now, I want to just tell you a few, what should I call them, of the anecdotes and inspirational messages in order to help us, so to speak, on the road to improving our speech and how we talk about people. So obviously understanding the importance of it will help us. The Torah compares talking evil about people to a snake bite. It says, just like in a snake bite, if a person gets bitten by a poisonous snake, it could affect the entire body and eventually cause the person to die, even though the bite was only in one small place. That's the way the poison gets into the blood and it kills. It says the same thing, the Torah compares the same thing as with Lashon Hara. The Lashon Hara comes into society. It's come, even if it's true, but it didn't have to be out there. It comes in, it's put there, And once it's put there, it can go all over the world. By the way, we talk about there's the spiritual concept and there's the actual concept. The spiritual concept is that something that has been said is now in the world. It's as though it's here. When a person's thoughts that don't come out are not out in the world. If you say something to one person, that person doesn't say it to anybody, it already has an impact. We're told that Lashon Hara has a negative impact on the person that it's being spoken about, whether the person hears it or it gets back to that person or not. The mere concept of talking about people puts judgment on that person. And the person listening to that, it gets judged. And the person saying it gets judged. Whether anybody, it could go between two people and that's it. It has a negative impact on their neshama, on their soul, on their very being. So it's almost like it's not something we want to do. But then on a practical side, sometimes wars begin with simple lashon hara. Somebody says something about somebody, people misunderstand, and people go to war. In previous shurim, I've given analogies of about how this person said this and he answered that, and the king thought that he was saying that he wants to, I can't remember the exact details, but I gave it in one of my previous shurim. This person said this message, he said that message, and they both misunderstood each other, and because of that they went to war, and they thought they were attacking each other. Yes, the shiur in Pirkei Avot, where one of the Tanaim talked about how we have to be careful with our wording, what we say, that it shouldn't be misinterpreted. That's a different concept of misinterpretation. But the same concept of intentionally saying negative things is the cause of almost all wars. And wars, I don't mean just wars with bows and arrows or with airplanes shooting missiles. I mean wars between parents and children, between husband and wife, between siblings. Most of the time it becomes from lashon hara. Somebody's saying something, and often it could be true, and more often it's not true, or it's a misunderstanding. And so it destroys. It's the ultimate destructor, ultimate destroyer. The Chafetz Chaim, one of the great authorities of the previous generation, he wrote his most famous work was the Mishnah Berurah, which was he lived in the 1900s, and he wrote the Mishnah Berurah, which is the most recent redaction of Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. It doesn't follow the Shulchan Aruch Harav, which is the founder of the Chabad movement, so that's why we don't necessarily only use that. We will definitely refer to it. It's definitely a very highly regarded book. But he wrote many other books. But his second most famous work is a book called Shmiras Halashon, which is all about being careful about how you speak. And he made such a big campaign about it. He went around campaigning and got many, many rabbis to sign. This became his, what do we call it? A person's ultimate life. There's a world.
Raison d'etre.
Raison d'etre, thank you. This almost became his raison d'etre, that he was so careful about what he says. And he made a teaching about how not talking about people, and he taught a lot about Mashiach as well, interestingly enough, from the non-Hasidic leaders. He wasn't Hasidic, but he was very close with Hasidic leaders, including the Chabad leaders. And from the non-Hasidic leaders, he was very, very more outspoken than the rest of them about Mashiach, and he spoke about the power of speaking words of holiness, and not talking badly would bring Mashiach. And it's very clear why, because Mashiach is a state of peace. And as I mentioned, the ultimate destroyer of peace is Lashon Hara. There's an interesting story, actually, about the Chafetz Chaim, how he was once traveling just outside his town. And he was on a train from one town to the other. And on the train, he meets a Jew. So he says to the Jew, "Tell me, where are you going?" He says, "I'm going to meet the great rabbi, the Chafetz Chaim." And he said, "Oh," he says, "Okay, why are you going to meet him?" He says, "Oh, I heard such incredible things about him." He's such an amazing person. And this man was raving things about the Chofetz Chaim to the Chofetz Chaim, not knowing that the man sitting in front of him was the Chofetz Chaim. The good old days before pictures and before videos, and where we had to just hear and live about people. We didn't have to have faces. So the Chofetz Chaim says, he's not that great. And this man said, how dare you talk about another such a great rabbi? And he was, the Chofetz Chaim was an incredibly special rabbi. He said, how dare you speak about him in such a way? And the man gave him a slap, not realizing that the person he's slapping is actually the Chofetz Chaim himself. And the Chofetz Chaim, later on, that man came, and of course he saw that the person he slapped, he was so regretful. He says, no, you taught me an extremely important lesson. That Lashon Hara is not just about other people, it's also about talking about yourself. It's not enough to just respect other people. Yes, the main concept of Lashon Hara is not to talk about other people. But you know where it starts? It starts from making sure that you don't talk bad about yourself. Because when you talk good about yourself, it doesn't mean that you have to lie and boast, but never say anything bad about yourself. When you have a good thing about yourself, you will also automatically be comfortable and not need to put other people down. People that don't think positively about them or talk negatively about themselves have a need to also find negativity in other people. It's fascinating that in Hasidus, and by the way, the Chofetz Chaim was very close with the fifth Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab. Although the Chofetz Chaim on his book Shmur Shaloshin, he wanted to get like an haskama, an approbation on his book, the Shmur Shaloshin, from the Rebbe Rashab. And for whatever reason, the Rebbe Rashab didn't give it. There's a whole story behind it, which I don't really want to get into right now. The one thing I want to say, I will say, the main reason why the Rebbe Rashab didn't give the approbation is because he didn't do it. He knew that everyone would be coming. It just wasn't the Hasidic way. Our rabbis generally did not give what we call askamot to books. It just would have got out of hand. Who do you say, this person, that person? But when the emissary of the Chofetz Chaim came to the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, asking him to write approbation, to have something, and give his stample of approval to the book. He mentioned something, how he said, people are saying that the Chabad students need to learn about Shmir Lashon regarding what they say. He said, my students some of them have not even thought Lashon Hara, let alone spoken Lashon Hara. Now, why am I telling you this? Because practically speaking, this mitzvah is incredibly important. And throughout the Jewish religious world, you will find a huge emphasis, particularly since the Chofetz Chaim, on this mitzvah. And it deserves and demands the attention that it gets because of its great power, without a doubt. But in Chabad, you won't hear as much about. We'll hear about it, but not as much. And the reason for that is because we believe that if people are in a position to talk badly about people, they're missing a much more, it's the symptom of something worse, which is what I wanted to talk about as well, which is the concept of loving your fellow. 2 Pesukim later, if we go back to the Torah, over here it says in verse 16, it says, Lo telech rachil, don't be gossiping. And then what does it say 2 Pesukim later, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha? The answer to all these questions is we have to love our fellow. And that's where it starts on. So in Chabad, this is the absolute and utmost emphasis. Love your fellow as yourself. These are just symptoms, all the rest of them. And they're important. But the emphasis, when the emphasis is on the love your fellow as yourself, then you don't have to emphasize so much not talking evil. Because as the Rebbe Rashab told the Chofetz Chaim's emissary, you won't even come to think evil about your fellow. He said, my students haven't even thought evil. I know it sounds like a hard level. And it's definitely not shoving this under the carpet. It's not throwing this important subject under the carpet. It's about being aware on it. It's just where you put the emphasis. The emphasis is not on not speaking negative. In Hasidic teachings, we never emphasized not talking negative or the negative things that we should do. We always emphasized what was the positive trait that counterbalances or pushes that other one away. And in the case of talking Lashon Hara is unfortunately a symptom of people that don't have enough love for their fellow. Because somebody that has worked on his love for his fellow Jew will not come to this.
Rabbi, can we include in that miscommunication though, like with the best of intentions? So, the giver and the receiver have the best of intentions, but there's still miscommunication, misunderstanding. Is that within scope of this discussion? Because there's a joke that came to mind which is suitable to share here,
Okay,
if I
for the
may.
joke's sake, we'll make it applicable. Go ahead. You can never say joke, no good joke.
Okay, so there's this fella that goes to an interview, and the interviewer looks at him and looks at the paperwork and says, "There's 5 years missing on your paperwork here on your resume." And the fellow looks a bit embarrassed. He says, "Oh yes, the 5 years. I was in Yale." And the interviewer said, "Why didn't you say so? You're in Yale. Of course we'll hire you. You can have the job." And the guy says, "Oh, good. I really need that job."
Yep, that's exactly. So we got to be careful what we say, huh? How we say miscommunication. Is miscommunication part of Lashon Hara? I think that's another law which is part of Dan Nechatzchus, being careful to judge your fellow properly and meritoriously, and not be judgmental on people and assume, at the very least, give them the benefit of the doubt and ask them when you think somebody has said something that's inappropriate or something that you don't like. So, and once again, miscommunication also, is your computer shaking? Is your screen shaking? Or is it just mine? Just mine. Okay.
It's just yours. Yes, it's
But
just
could you see
yours.
me shaking?
Yes, yes. You're
Okay.
moving
That's
up and
good.
down like that.
Okay, it's waking you up. It's waking you up and making you dizzy. Good. You'll have a good sleep after.
Yeah.
So let's look at just a few more ideas that I wanted to touch on before we conclude tonight. Unless anybody has any more jokes or any more questions, I wanted to finish on a few more practical things. There's so much, by the way. This topic is huge. As I said, there's many buttons, many books. I have actually in my own library a few books, full books, just on this topic. So yeah, we could talk about this for weeks on end. There's a line that Hashem says, "I can't live for somebody that talks evil against other people." There's a few times that we say that. The Talmud tells us that Hashem says, "I can't live with another person in case of when he has ego, and his overly ego, arrogance, that type of ego, negative ego, and ruchilot, who talks evil about other people, a gossip sayer." That's the other example. So we know that the power of Lashon Hara is so powerful that, as I mentioned, it has an impact on people from afar. So there's a line in Torah that tells us that God puts protection over us to protect us, to help us protect ourselves. So for the nose and the ears, we need the least protection, so to speak, but we still have protection. We can close our ears or we can walk away. We could try not to smell things. But the things that we have to be most sensitive about is what we see and what we say. So God puts lids over our eyes to make sure to remind us that we can close our eyes when we're looking at evil. And for our mouth, he gives us a double color in both the teeth and the lips to remind us to keep our lips closed and not say things that are evil about other people. If you have, as my father used to say, nothing nice to say, don't say it. There's an interesting story of the Baal Shem Tov, where he used to take, sometimes he would get all these students onto a wagon and send them away. And they would kind of follow his direction. Sometimes, on the rare occasion, he would just load his students onto a wagon and he wouldn't even join them. The one time he loaded them onto a wagon, told them to go to a particular inn and a particular destination. They loaded up, they went to the inn, and they arrived in. They asked all different types of questions. They wanted to find out the guy. They weren't sure. They didn't recognize the person. They were asking all the questions about how kosher is the food and what type of level of kashrut are you keeping. And eventually they listened to him and they accepted that it was to their standards. And as they were eating, they were talking about all the details and how they had been so careful to make sure that everything was to the right standard of kashrut for them. And then, sitting in the corner, somebody overheard all their discussions and said, "Tell the young fellows, are you as careful? You're so careful about what you eat. Are you as careful with what comes out of your mouth as what goes in your mouth?" And they understood that that was the lesson the Baal Shem Tov was trying to teach them. They went back to their Rebbe after that, having learned a very powerful lesson. That as people, we're health conscious. We care about kashrut. We care about health. We're all. We don't realize that sometimes the worst unhealthy things are either we're hearing from other people negativity, and by the way, turning on the news, something that we all feel like we've got to do these days. Most, not all, I shouldn't talk, but some of us feel like we've got to be glued to the news. That's evilness entering inside of us. And the same way, when we're not careful about what comes out of us, making sure that only evilness. And I'm saying the news is evil, not because it's evil per se, that it tends to be evil, but that's what you're hearing. You're hearing the negative stories in the world. You really, out of every few, out of every newspaper, there'll be maybe one positive story or a couple of positive stories. And often it's got to do with finances, with somebody, the stock market went up a bit. And that actually only benefits certain people. So there's so much more we can say about this topic, but I want to just remind us that when we're talking about the mitzvah of Lashon Hara, being careful about what we say, it affects all people in all types of places. I didn't even get into all the side concepts of Avak Lashon Hara, which means dust of Lashon Hara, all the subcategories, which tells us that even saying things about people next to certain people that we know don't like them could be considered negative. So what's the lesson in all this? What's the ultimate goal? Yes, we get the lesson. We've got to be careful with what we say, and we've got to talk and talk positively about people and be careful to what we listen. But I think there's a deeper message. A deeper message is to understand the power of what we can do and what we can say. When we say words of Torah, we sit here an hour night and we say and we learn something, we're thinking to ourselves, look, what was accomplished? Just the mere thing of sitting and listening to Torah has a positive impact on the world. If negative words can have an impact on the world, how much more so could positive words have an impact on the world? If we have, God forbid, said something negative about somebody, or as a parent, especially of young kids, where there's so much that we can say to them that they do wrong during a day, and we end up, but if we remember that little thing that we say, if we remember to insert the good things and the praises and the gratitude, that makes all the difference. Because as evil and as bad as evil languages, the power of positivity and gratitude and praise is that much more. And therefore, I don't think it's just about knowing how to be careful about not saying bad things, but it's also remembering the importance of talking positive. And that's ultimate happiness.
Rabbi, can I stretch a friendship and share another relevant joke?
Yes.
About this family who have an elderly grandfather and they take him to the doctor. Can you do something about him? He's hard of hearing. And the doctor, very wise, he shoos everyone out of the room. He's just sitting there with the grandfather and he does a full examination. And he says to him at the end, I've got no idea why they brought you here because your hearing is perfect. Your health, your hearing is perfect. And the grandfather leans forward and he says to the doctor, listen, I know that and you know that, but don't tell them I've changed the will 3 times already.
I like that. That's a good one. Good. All right, gents. Thanks for joining. If anybody has any questions or more jokes, I'm all yours. Thanks for joining.
Yeah. Thank you, Rabbi. That was very, very interesting. Thank you.
Have a good night. Thank you.
And you too. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Laila Tov.
Lala Tov.